My name is Sajud Hamadi, and I will be moderating this evening. I want to begin by thanking the Middle Eastern and North African Chamber of Commerce, in other words, the MENA Chamber, for hosting this panel of esteemed guests, which I will introduce very soon. But first, thank you to the CEO and founder of the MENA Chamber, Faye Nimmer, for her diligent work in setting this all up for us. She is an absolute powerhouse, and none of this would have been possible without her. Next, I would like to introduce each of our esteemed panelists. We have Wayne Seiler, the Vice President of SRS Pharmacy Systems. We also have Dr. Maisa Haidar. She is a physician and owner at Community Care RX. And then we have also Dr. Farah Shadloul, who is the Director of Professional Development with the Michigan Pharmacists Association, in addition to the Pharmacy Emergency Preparedness Coordinator with the Michigan Pharmacists Association. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you for agreeing to be on our panel. And last but definitely not least, I want to begin by thanking all of you for joining us today, and I want to make sure I'm sure each of you will find all the information you take from today will be invaluable to your practice. As I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a very informative panel on the recent changes in regulatory compliance for the pharmaceutical industry and the implication that those changes will have on pharmacists and pharmacies. During our panel discussion, we will touch on how these changes impact negative reimbursements, what is going on with the legislative and regulatory advocacy, and the comparison between the CMS Fee Schedule stagnation to the inflationary index. I would like to direct my first question to Farah. Are you able to give us a brief overview of why this panel discussion is of relevance?
Yes, I think in addition to what you just said, I think this is a timely subject to talk about. We have been seeing a lot of reimbursement issues with PBM throughout our practice, which is not only just hindering the pharmacy as an independent pharmacy owner, but also hindering patient care. It's not allowing patients to either receive their medication. There's patient steering, which requires patients to go to other pharmacies rather than going to their pharmacy that they've known, their pharmacist that they've developed a relationship with for so long. And I think it's, post-pandemic, worldwide pandemic, we saw that pharmacists are with the spotlight shined on us, and being that we were at the forefront of the pandemic and helped, and we are the most accessible healthcare professional. And I think an independent pharmacist is even that much more accessible to our patients in our community. So this is a very timely discussion, and I appreciate being here and having this discussion.
Thank you for that overview. That was very helpful. Wayne, what legal frameworks exist in Michigan to protect independent pharmacies from unfair reimbursement practices by pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, as we were talking about earlier?
Well, that may be surprising, but there's none. There's nothing in this system that protects and guarantees a reimbursement by a pharmacy. The reimbursement is determined by the PBMs. It's a contract that comes out, and the pharmacy has a choice to either take it or leave it. The PBMs determine what a pharmacy gets reimbursed. There's no choice. The PBMs also determine which medication the patient gets based upon what a formulary is. So those are the things that they have no control over. If they don't accept the contract, then all the scripts are pulled from them. And the other thing is that we're seeing on the software side probably about close to 15 to 20% of the reimbursements are below the cost of the medication that the pharmacy is buying, okay? And the worst part of that is, even on Medicare programs, when you have immunization products that are supposed to be in place to keep patients out of the hospital long term, that's a negative cost for the pharmacy. And so the pharmacist has the dilemma: do I reimburse this and lose money in order to keep this patient out of the hospital long term? Those are tough decisions that they have to make, and it's a very, very difficult thing because it's either take it or leave it contract.
Oh wow, I did not anticipate you saying none. That is surprising, Farah, and concerning. But Farah, is the MPA aware of the PBM complaints from the independent pharmacies they represent?
Yeah, so we are aware of those that make us aware of them. So traditionally what happens is if you have a complaint regarding the PBM, you reach out to DIFS, which is the Department of Insurance and Financial Services. However, we only know of those that loop us in, right? So we've seen MAC list violations, we've seen patient steering issues, we've seen a couple other things. However, we have not seen everything. I know it's probably a drop in the bucket to what's going on. So what we are recommending is then for folks to loop us in on these so that way we can actually hold DIFs accountable for any of these issues.
Okay, thank you. And how would they go about letting you know?
Just as simple as CCing us to an email, either the Director of Government Affairs, Eric Roth, or just MPA in general. You can just loop us in that way, or reach out to you guys even and just let us know, and you have my contact information as well.
Okay, good.
This is brand new for this year. It went through in Bill 4348.
Mhm.
That's one thing that's happened, is that individuals complained enough. So when the bill went through, it put the PBMs under the Department of Insurance and Financial Services. So they are now the ones that license it. So that's the thing that's now available to pharmacies, and we can leave a form with you that you want to put out. That form's workable so that individual pharmacies can make a complaint on a formal basis. But it's important, as Sarah said, that to let MPA know too. But we can leave a form with you so you can send it out.
Yes, thank you. Nysa, how can pharmacists and/or pharmacies discuss, report, or other ways they can discuss or report similar issues so they may be included in the conversation?
So there's multiple avenues, right? Multiple channels. You can start at the government relations through MPA, like we said, through the Department of Insurance and Financial Services. And then surprisingly enough, right now there is a healthcare fraud. Excuse me. Well, there is.
Okay.
There's a task force that's been assembled by the state of Michigan. The Attorney General Office and the Office of Inspector General have unified this task force, and they've designated heat zones all around Michigan. So they're actively looking for any kind of violations. So when you reach out to them, they're actually very eager to respond to you, let you know, okay, we'll get somebody on it, or can we have more information? Another thing would be through the independents to reach out to their pharmacy associations, Wayne County, Oakland County, Macomb County, and again, the forms that Wayne has left behind. Those are phenomenal. They get directly where they need to go, to the administrators, the investigators, and they won't leave it because right now there is an active issue, right? So they have to address it at some point.
Okay, thank you for that response. Wayne, are there any pending legislative efforts to address PBM behavior?
Well, in the state of Michigan, this new bill went through 4348 is a good example. It's a start. There were things in the House version that would have addressed issues like the negative reimbursements, but when I talked to the governor about it later on, she says, that's politics, some of those things got dropped out of it. So we're thankful that the legislation put the DIFs in charge. So they're one organization that we really have to spend time with. We met with them, and the issue there with them is that they're just learning, okay? They're way behind the curve in knowledge about how the PBMs work. There's laws that are already in place. We talk about any willing provider that if a pharmacy wants to be part of a network, they can. That's a federal law, but nobody's enforcing it. And those are some of the problems that we have. Some laws are there but not being enforced. We just got back from Washington, D.C., where 2 bills have just been passed by the House, and we need to get it passed by the Senate. And they're addressing Medicaid and spread pricing in Medicaid. I don't know if we have time. Does everybody understand what spread pricing is? Okay. Spread pricing is the fee that a pharmacy gets reimbursed versus what is charged to the government. The PBMs have been notorious for spread pricing, and the reason you can't track it is a lot of your companies that are self-funded, which means a company generally over 300 people are self-funded. They pay all the medical bills, they pay all the drug bills. And the pharmacy, the company will go out and get a quote from Blue Cross Blue Shield to say, how much will you run my programs for? They'll say, we'll run it for 6.3% or 6.4%. And that's what they do, but the company being self-funded, or the government in this case, they pay all the bills. Well, if I'm a company and I wanna know what I'm being charged, I may have 1,000 employees and they could go to 50, 60 different pharmacies. That employer can't go to that pharmacy and say, well, what did Sally Sue pay for her script? Okay? That's it, but you can't do that. So they don't know, but then the PBM goes and charges the self-funding company 300 or 400% markup. That's the spread pricing that we talk about. And that's what needs to be controlled when you hear spread pricing. So that's part of this bill, to reduce that in Medicaid and just go back to a fee for service. The second bill that's out there right now, that the House has passed, that's why we're there to get the Senate to pass these bills, is to be able to define, or have CMS, which is Medicare, Medicaid, define the behavior of the PBMs. It's always been an issue all along that CMS, as the PBMs fight with CMS, you can't tell us how to deal with our customers, okay? And so they've always said that, because it's a private type of thing between the PBMs and the pharmacies. So they've never been able to do that. So that's what's important about this law. Debbie Dingle's behind it too, with a couple other, Buddy Carter. And they want CMS to define the behavior, what the PBMs have to do in monitoring Medicare and Medicaid. Now that's beneficial, but the problem is it's 40 to 50% of the business. It varies by pharmacy, because all the commercial plans are still out there that you have through Blue Cross and Shield and all the other companies. So that needs to be addressed too outside the federal government, and that needs to be tackled at the state level.
Thank you for that. Next up, with mail order pharmacies on the rise and pressure from PBMs squeezing independents, what legal options can Michigan's independent pharmacies use to compete fairly?
Well, that's what Wayne touched upon. It has to be addressed on the state's level so that there is some kind of a viable way for the pharmacies to compete. Right now, there's no competition. There's no way. The mail order has squashed any type of competition. If you are an independent pharmacy and you're, let's say you want a contract as a 340B pharmacy or an LTC or whatever the case may be, not only do you have to put in more work, more money, and more time, you're gonna get less accounts.
Okay.
And so, and remember, they have contracted the people that are in their PBMs. So for instance, union, they can't go anywhere other than what's specified. People that are under employer contracts, even under state, the Department of Health and Human Services will have them locked into a certain program. And now we have people that are locked into pharmacies for narcotics. So it's gotten very messy, very messy. There has to be a way to delegate everything properly and allow fair competition, because independents are not going to be able to break into the market right now. It's not possible.
One thing Mrs. Sullivan with is that we're seeing new challenges out there that the PBMs are starting to work together. You'll see rejections that come through. It's that after 2 fills, the script is rejected. And you have to go to a CVS store or opt a mail order. Now those are 2 competing PBMs. So when you see that on the same rejection, that tells you that they're working together and collaborating together, going against independents. And that's antitrust. We've started to go to the Attorney General discussing this, which is a whole new thing now to address the antitrust. We had some quick meetings with the Federal Trade Commission and all. So we hope that's another avenue that we can go into to come back and say, hey, besides all the other violations you're doing, now this is antitrust.
Yeah.
And I just had a customer that says, you can't get the product here, okay? Because it's not within 5 miles of a CVS store. I mean, they're going to such extremes out there to govern, take the business themselves and get rid of the independents. And the independents were so important during COVID,
Yeah.
okay? All the immunization that did and everything.
Yeah.
We can't afford to keep losing one pharmacy a day. We just can't do that.
No, and we were talking about negative reimbursements, right? So we've seen it over and over and over. It's almost become like a script. We see that, for example, to make it so easy, the medication will cost $1,000. The PBM will reimburse $800, $850, $840. Within that marker, So now you're forcing the pharmacy or the pharmacist or the owner, whatever it may be, to lose money to retain the patient. Whereas if they go somewhere else, like a major retail, CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, they're reimbursing them almost double what they would have given you. So closer to, you know, 1,800, 1,900. And so those contracts obviously were facilitated through their PBM because remember, CVS is owned by CVS Caremark, the insurance. Walgreens is owned by Optum. So everyone has their hand in both retail and the PBM. So not only are they the managing insurance for these programs, they're also the retail. And so when they came up in Congress, they're like, no, we're different. We're here and they're there and we'll never work together. And the second they signed off, they're like, just kidding. And then right away merged and they just started and they cornered the entire market. Within that time frame, it was a very short time frame, they've put a lot of people out of business.
Okay, wow. All that explains why I've seen so many pharmacists closing left and right.
Absolutely.
One of the problems we're having too is the government sometimes looks at the situation where if you try to say to them that pharmacy's losing money, sometimes they don't listen.
Mm-hmm.
What they do listen to is the fact that patients are losing access.
Mhm.
And that's a critical thing for us too, you know. In the government, again, we fight them on different areas. One of the most ridiculous things happened here was last year in the Bipartisan Civic Community Act, okay? This is called the gun bill. I hate to bring it up, but just to let you know what goes on with the federal
Yeah,
level
they're
too.
padded bills.
Yes. The PBMs got an exemption from the anti-kickback laws, okay? To get kickbacks from the big pharmaceuticals if they use their products. Now, there was a gentleman called Kwame Kilpatrick, which you remember about
Yes.
kickbacks and what the situation is. But the
Definitely do.
PBMs were able to finagle to get an exemption from this law, to get the kickbacks from the big pharmaceuticals in exchange for sharing $180 billion of this kickback money with the government over the next 10 years. So basically what we're telling our seniors, the price of your drugs is high or going higher because the senator said we can fund infrastructure with it, and we can build bridges with the $180 that we're getting from for you guys on the kickbacks. So that's the thing that we also fight, and it's a frustration because when we go to Congress and we want Congress to change the bill, there's a group over there called the Congressional Budget Office. It comes back and says, well, if we change this law, we're gonna lose $18 billion a year, $180 billion. Do we wanna change the law? So that's the other frustration that we have, you know. And what's so important is representatives, the Attorney General, the Governor, and I mentioned to them, they didn't know anything about this. That's the way the PBMs work. They snip this in some legislation like the gun bill and get it done. And that's where it falls upon all of us to educate our legislature and tell them what's going on and tell them our issues. And tell them that they're forcing you to go to a pharmacy that you don't want to go to. They're forcing you to do mail order that you don't want to.
Yeah.
Those are what we have to do as individuals in order to get things changed. If you don't do anything, nothing's gonna happen.
Another issue is you have to rely on the community in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
The pharmacy community has to work together. We've seen prescribers lock patients in for a narcotics program to their advantage so that the patient can't go anywhere and they're getting kickbacks from the pharmacy.
Wow.
Lock my patient in,
Yeah.
keep my patient at the pharmacy, I give you 25%. And that's what I'm seeing, like what we're seeing as a whole now. And so unfortunately, it's highly illegal and you know that, but who's regulating this?
Right.
Who's enforcing this? We don't have anybody. I mean, basically, we're speaking into a vacuum. Nobody can hear our complaints, and they've only gotten worse. The PBMs are emboldened.
Yeah.
They've gone to a line to a position where we've never seen the things that they're doing now. I mean, they're literally making their way into the universities. It's horrible.
Oh, thank you for that. That's all news to me, and it's very important that we continue to educate people and the community to know, you know, what steps we can take to address that. Which brings me to my next question. How are Michigan's independent pharmacies mobilizing at the grassroots level to counter the lobbying power of PBMs? And if this isn't the right question for you,
No, I think this is a great question just because I'll build off of what you two just said. A lot of people don't know about these issues that are happening, right? It's not public knowledge and it's made on purpose to not be public knowledge just because they're going to keep getting away with it. So one, familiarize yourself with the PBM legislation that we have and then report any violations that happen. Loop in MPA just so we can have that collated response and that way we can keep everybody diffs, in check and just make sure everything is they're working on. In addition, honestly, I think looping in your legislators because your legislators need to know these are the issues so that way when we go and propose additional PBM transparency regulations, they know why we are doing it. It's not we're doing it because we hate PBMs, it's because it's justified. I've seen in some states where there's coalitions where independent pharmacies come together.
That was my next question, if there are any, is
You
there
know,
any coalition in Michigan?
That's what we're working on.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's necessary where you can get patients as well and key stakeholders, organizations such as MENA, and so I think that's where it is. We need to hold them accountable, and it's not just an MPA thing or a Wayne thing or it's all over. So we need to make the loud noises that we should be doing so we can put the spotlight on them.
Okay. And go ahead.
And if there's any pharmacists that are listening, one of the big things is bring your legislature into the pharmacy and let them see how it's working. I was listening to the Senate Finance Committee the other day talking about some of the bills and all. This senator came back and said, I was at my pharmacy and I found out that the pharmacy couldn't fill certain scripts. She was astounded her pharmacy couldn't fill a legitimate script. And that was because of the fact they'd gotten eliminated from the network, okay? And she was astounded that happened. So that's an important thing. If you have a pharmacy, bring the legislator to the pharmacy and see this stuff firsthand.
Yeah, and speak up. I mean, if something is wrong, if the negative reimbursements are too much, if you are losing patients, if you're ready to go, speak up, say something. Don't close your doors and put your head down. I mean, that's not what we're here for. We're fighting for the independent pharmacy to continue. It's a staple in the community. I mean, every community needs an independent pharmacy or 10 or 100, whatever the case may be for the population, because they're the only ones that are going to focus on the patient and not the bottom line, right? So we want to protect the pharmacies. You worked hard to get to where you are, your education, the money that you put into your business, and we want it to be viable. We don't want to close the doors and walk away. That doesn't help anybody.
Of course not.
So again, that's one of the most important things is you have to speak up. Nobody knows what's going on until something is said.
Yes. And you may have already touched on this, but what unconventional approaches can independent pharmacies in Michigan adopt to broaden their revenue streams?
So right now, it's a little bit limited because of what we said, the restrictions that the PBMs are putting on. But if things were to ease up, obviously, take more community services and get into the, there's a lot of serviced communities, areas that need pharmaceutical assistance, that need independent assistance. They can't get into the bigger places like, there's the low income society issues, like at COTS, for example. COTS is a shelter that takes in families, right? They're always looking for a pharmacy because these people don't have a home. That is their temporary home. They work in tandem with independent pharmacies. So these are great things that are overlooked. And it continues, if we don't point pharmacies in the right direction to service these particular people, they're never going to get service because there's no connection. There's no liaison for any of these programs, right?
Yeah.
And just to build on that, there's also additional services that a pharmacy can do, right? So it's not just the dispensing portion. There's so many patient monitoring activities that pharmacists can do. There's, a birth control prescribing that hopefully is going to come about with the legislation. So, and with the scope of expansion bills that we are proposing at the MTA through the legislator, I think there's going to be more billable services that we can actually do.
Not just that, there are unconventional things such as, regulation, compliance, you have education, you have scouting and recruiting. There's a million things within pharmacy. There's research, there's technology, there's engineering. So of course there's a lot of different avenues, but if you're an independent pharmacy, I think you're kind of limited at this point.
Yeah.
Can I put you on the spot?
Of course.
Let's talk about point of care.
Of course.
Go ahead.
No, you talk about it.
Point of care is the type of situation where a pharmacy can expand and do different tests and all, be prescribe different things for antibiotics and colds and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's something that can be a small investment, I don't know, $3,000 to get the additional
Yeah.
equipment and perform a lot more services for it, so it's getting to be the point you can't get into a doctor's office sometimes for a lot of things, so pharmacies hopefully can expand into these areas.
Does that require additional certification?
I don't
It
So the
requires-
current- yeah.
Go ahead.
The current legislation, and we're still waiting on the Board of Pharmacy to implement rules or promulgate rules. So once that comes out, there'll be more information that would be shared. But as of now, I assume there would be some sort of training that would be associated with it. But it could be like one of those things where even if you can't bill somebody's insurance, it could be like a copay, a cash copay for the patient, which, I mean, I would rather go to a pharmacy, walk in,
Yeah.
pay them whatever the copay is, than go to schedule an appointment, go to my
Yeah.
PCP, get a test, then go to the pharmacy, pick up my prescription if I tested positive for strep or flu or whatever,
Yeah.
so I think this is something that that's hopefully on the rise.
And streamlines. the
Yeah.
process.
Exactly, and all it requires in the state, so far from what I understand, is just a standing order from a physician. So you have to be collaborating and have all your insurances in order, so it's really not that big of a transition.
Yeah, so that right now, but hopefully in the next couple months or so, we're gonna have rules that will allow pharmacists to do strep, flu, and COVID, I believe.
Yeah, okay.
COVID is-
Oh, that's amazing. No, it'll definitely streamline the process and make it more affordable for families to go and as opposed to having to see.
More convenient, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine you have a little toddler or your child and they're screaming bloody murder. You just wanna go in and out. You don't want to go to a.
So this would make it so they didn't have to go to the physician first, they could go straight to the. Okay.
Because remember, we have a dwindling system of physicians, so
Yeah.
even like pediatricians, we're having a hard time finding pediatricians in the area. People were more geared towards, for instance, COVID, we had a lot of people graduating in that area. Hardly anywhere, and especially like in the DMC program, from what I understood, there was like less people applying to pediatrics than internal medicine and family and emergency. So they're seeing that dwindle down, so you would have to address these issues. You have to know what's missing so that you can add value, and
Yes.
I don't think that those numbers or that intention is there yet. Nobody's really looked and said, what are we missing from our community? There's hardly any, and in every community.
Yeah.
And it has to go in big cities, and we're a big city, for instance, Dearborn, for
It is a big
example.
city.
So you're talking about
I mean, like
150,000,
I think we're the seventh
Yeah,
largest in the
very
state.
110,000
Yeah.
residents. So for 110,000 residents, you're very limited on your pediatricians, endocrinologists, dermatologists, so there has to be that as well. We have to look in and see what are we missing in these communities that are, growing and exponentially growing. Our community in Dearborn especially, we gained about 30,000 people in a very short period of time.
Okay.
So as all cities grow, so should their, the detail to their physicians, their pharmacies, and all of that for the community themselves.
And to conduct study sessions so that you're able to
Absolutely.
recognize these issues.
Absolutely. Wayne State was doing that prior to COVID, and they just haven't gotten back on that.
Wow. So thank you for that. Was the MPA aware of the regulatory changes leading to the removal of the MPJ fee, and what recommendations do they propose moving forward to compensate for the elimination of the exam?
Yeah, so we were aware. It was, the way that it happened was in an unconventional manner where the rule was open and the public, the work group for the Board of Pharmacy, the rules work group ended up just removing it completely. I think we're the third state to do this in the nation, and it was more about it's a limiting factor for licensure for people to reciprocate from other states. And so it was to increase the number of pharmacists in the state of Michigan and to allow for that reciprocity, especially around in the neighboring states. I can tell you our membership is very split on whether we should or should not.
Okay.
I have my own thoughts and we can talk off camera.
I was just about to ask.
Clearly she's a fan. She's definitely a fan.
And I think it's something that we have been working with the colleges of pharmacy to make sure that their students are prepared when they graduate. They know how to look up the laws and how to, read and understand, fully comprehend the laws. And what MPAs so far, what we are recommending is to increase our continuing education requirements from 1 hour of law, jurisprudence and ethics to 2 hours, just to allow individuals to the laws are changing all the time, and sometimes they change and we don't even know they're changing. So
Yeah.
I think it's very important to make sure that we protect our pharmacists that are working, especially at a store level, that they don't have legal counsel to go and say, am I doing this legal or not? It's up to them to do it. So trying to protect our pharmacists, and hopefully this recommendation will be taken up by the board and Laura.
And was this a result of this change, elimination of the exam? Was it a result of the feedback that you guys received from public comment? You said it was kind of split, right?
Yeah, so our board, so we have our MPA board and then we have section boards under us. There are some folks that said, yes, get rid of it. And those are I think the younger generation of people where they graduated, they took that exam, and it was more of it was a stressful exam. It is a stressful exam. I sat through it, and it's not fun. Nobody wants to sit through an exam like that. So I think it's more of the board and Laura worked directly with NABP, which is the administrator of that exam. And some of the questions were not updated as they should have throughout the year. So when people were taking these exams, sometimes they're answering questions based on their outdated exams or laws.
Yeah.
And so that's how it initially started, that talk that generated, is that we're taking these exams, we're taking this, and it's not really relevant to practice today.
Yeah.
And again, I think it was because there was this notion of there's a pharmacist shortage, and I hate that. There isn't a pharmacist shortage. There's just pharmacists that are deciding whether they want to work for company X, company Y, or not. There were pharmacy walkouts that was in the news that we learned about. So I think it was more to allow for that, for pharmacists to easily get licensed in the state of Michigan, and to allow neighboring pharmacists to come here and work as well in neighboring states.
I can share your thoughts on it as a member.
As a member, I have a problem with them eliminating the exam, very big problem, because students are graduating, and things that were covered in the exam, we're now seeing them in real time. So things that they would have known not to do, and things that they would have had a red line about, now we're seeing in practice. So laws are unintentionally being broken right now. And unfortunately, it turns into this hamster wheel of, I don't want to use the word fraud. Is there a word for it?
No, but again, I
Just
think
unethical practices.
Unethical practice, but
Unintentional.
and
Right.
ultimately it becomes unintentional, but in the eyes of the law,
they don't.
it's still classified as fraud.
Yeah.
And you can't change it based on your personality and intention. However it comes across, it's black and white. Did you do this,
Exactly.
XYZ? And the answer is yes or no. There is no clarification whatsoever. So when a pharmacist, especially a newly graduated pharmacist within the first 5 years of their practice, commits these unintentional mishaps.
Because it's not about whether you knew, it's about whether you should have known.
Right. And so you have to, kind of preemptively know what's right and what's wrong. And so when you do commit these I want to say, violations.
Violations.
Let's use the word violation.
Even if it's unintentional.
Yeah, so unintentional violations, what ends up happening is, again, the law doesn't care because it is written a certain way.
And there's no step, so in the field of law, I'm an attorney, a little different, but we also have to take an exam, we have the bar exam, but then we also have to take the MPRE, which is specific to the ethical conduct that attorneys are supposed to engage in.
Correct.
Is there a separate exam for pharmacists in regards to the ethical obligations that a pharmacist has?
That was covered in the MPJ.
So
Or was it all,
it
it was
was
just one exam?
part of it,
Okay.
yeah. Now we just have a jurisprudence and ethics CE that you take.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
You can
I
just
think-
show up for it.
There are some people that are they're for MPJ removal, right? But the thing is what people do not understand is pharmacy is the most regulated
Yes.
profession
Right.
out of all of healthcare.
Wow.
Because, the Board of Pharmacy regulates physicians if they're doing something that breaches Board of Pharmacy regulations or laws or rules. So we are the most regulated, and I think that's the issue, is that how are we making sure that the population, even if somebody is licensed in Ohio, coming to practice in Michigan, how do we make sure that they know that gabapentin is a Scheduled 5 here
Right.
and not in Ohio? So how do we know that? And if they write for it and it gets dispensed without a DEA number, they're still at fault because they
Right.
acknowledged that they know the law of Michigan. So
Okay.
there needs to be some sort of accountability for pharmacies to make sure that we're not just setting them up to fail.
Exactly.
Is it a CE? I don't, personally, I don't think so.
No.
But again, this is a very hot topic still at the MPA.
Because with CE, you don't really know if they're retaining any of your information or if they're just, pretending to listen and.
Well, what's frustrating is the CEs, you can do them online. And literally, the people are sitting at home, in their pajamas in bed or whatever the case may be, and they're watching a CE. But how does that equate to your practice, right? How are you implementing this, or are you just running it through so you can take the exam at the end? And on top of that, the pharmacy laws that she's talking about within regulation, it's not something little. These are things that can go to criminal and civil issues, right? And you may think that it's nothing, but at the end of the day, you may lose your license, your business, and everything.
Yeah.
And you won't even be allowed to work in retail whatsoever. So how do we protect everybody? Where's the line that we draw that, okay, inconvenience has gotten us to this point. How is that really worth it though?
Yeah.
Is it worth it to remove the inconvenience?
And sadly, there's no data or any qualifying information that says the MPJE prevents X, Y, and Z,
Right.
or it doesn't prevent X, Y, and Z. So again, I think this is something that we will be revisiting eventually based on what the outcomes are. But it's really hard. It's sad to
How
say,
much fraud happens
because
between
exactly 10 years. Isn't that sad?
How many people went to jail when we took this off?
But it's hard. I wish I had a crystal ball. I really do.
There's no way to know.
Just
Go
real quick for the pharmacy students that are watching, can you explain what MPJE is, since they won't have to sit for the exam, why it's important, why it's critical, why it was critical to have in the first place?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You're one of the lucky ones.
There you go.
So your MPJE is basically, it's like the NAPLEX, except it's just laws and ethics of pharmacy. And basically it was just removed recently. However, the reason why MPA initially took a stance to not remove it was because it actually, when you're studying for the MPJE, as a person who studied for it, you are actually looking up laws. You're navigating our system, the Michigan legislator's system, to see how you can look up laws. You are also looking at, your Board of Pharmacy rules and going in a deep dive into how to look up laws. So it could be that the law that you take today is different than when you graduate and you take the law exam and then you practice. I can tell you the law has changed tremendously since I graduated and took the MPJE. And that was in 2017. So it's basically because I was able to study for the law exam and look up laws and learn how to look them up, I was able to say, you know what, this is what I need to do when I'm practicing. If I had a question, this is where I go. If you want to build on that.
Yeah, and so for the ones that don't know, it's the Michigan Pharmacy Jurisprudence exam. So it encapsulates all of the laws that you would typically need to know in practice. With regards to what she said, when you're researching and you're looking up these laws for the exam, what ends up happening is you retain the majority of the information. Therefore, if there's a question and you're iffy about it, you may remember the basis or the foundation of that question. And so it's easy to find an answer because you know where to look. If you,
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not gonna look because you don't think that you're doing anything wrong at that point. Whereas, like she said, it's extremely regulated, extremely, to the point where you can send a claim and get a phone call within 30 minutes from the auditing system within the PBM. They will audit your script on site.
Wow.
And it's really that serious.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that. With what we saw after the healthcare hacking and just how easily it could have crippled the entire healthcare system, what safeguards do we have in place now against AI theft of information for ransom? It's a loaded question.
It's a sit-up for that one.
Oh, yeah.
It's a loaded
It
question.
is, it's a type of thing where everybody says they fix a problem, but the problem is that you have so much access to data, okay? And especially when they start talking about electronic records and
Yeah.
everything, who controls them, who can go and change them, who cannot, you know? And it's a type of thing where, okay, you fixed it now, but it's the next level, the hackers go higher, you know? I came from
Yeah.
military, you know, and you have different systems, and then the other country does this, and you just keep stepping up.
Find ways to
Yeah.
infiltrate the system,
That's
yeah.
correct, I've had two banks that we've had been hacked, you know? To come back and say there's a fail-safe system, I don't use the word never and always, you know, with an engineering background, but we hope that it's been fixed, but to guarantee that it has, I mean, look at MGM and the casinos that have the problems, you know?
Yeah.
Everybody's susceptible to it, so it's just one of those things, we hope we can eliminate it and reduce it.
Yeah, I mean, they've held hospitals at ransom. They've shut down hospitals, I think it was Arizona, Colorado, they shut down an entire hospital until it was paid. And ransomware, it's hard. And with the way AI has regenerated and just exploded into the market right now, we don't know. It's more of a wait and see thing. With what happened with Change Healthcare, unprecedented. We had to recontract through Relay, which you know, and you know definitely, you know. We had to contract they had to contract with a separate system altogether to run eligibility for patients. You could go into the pharmacy in that like 20 days in which it was ransom and go to fill your prescription. We wouldn't know if you had insurance.
Yeah.
Excuse me, we wouldn't know if you had insurance. We wouldn't know which plan you were under, how to bill your insurance. So each patient was a phone call to the insurance company to get their information. A lot of people couldn't even function.
Yeah.
They couldn't even, there's a pharmacy in Livonia that closed their doors for 2 weeks. They couldn't maintain them.
Mm-hmm.
They could not maintain, they had no way of checking eligibility. And it's rough, but,
Yeah.
and for new pharmacies, for instance, I'll give you an example, I'm a new pharmacy, we couldn't check eligibility for 2 weeks, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare, and we lost patients right then and there.
And I can imagine what that does for the business.
Yeah.
It makes it really difficult.
Extremely.
Yeah.
And there's no way to navigate around it, this is all new territory.
Mhm.
We've never seen anything like this, and then as ransomware,
And also there
I
aren't
mean-
really any safeguards in place to.
from what I understood from Optum is they paid the ransom and then someone stole the ransom from them, which is why it took so much.
Oh, wow.
That's why it took so much.
A little change of topic, but how can independent pharmacies in Michigan build strong relationships with policymakers?
Yeah, I think, Wayne, you touched on it. We're big proponents of actually getting your legislators to your pharmacy. Let them see, bill a claim in front of them, and their jaw's gonna drop when they're like, what do you mean you need to pay to give this prescription to this patient? They don't know that, and it's, you know, they are the people that are in charge of making these laws and
Yes.
rules and regulations, which is mind-boggling that the fact that they don't understand pharmacy. And the thing is MPA can go in and tell them X, Y, and Z, this is what we're doing, I can talk until I turn blue, but because you're the constituents, you need to make sure that you talk to your legislators. You elect them. So if you need help, reach out, we can coordinate. A lot of them have coffee hours now.
Yeah.
Again, with COVID being, you know, almost whatever. But, you know, reach out to them. Almost, can never say it's gone. You know, we do letter writing campaigns as well. So if you are not a member of the Voter Voice campaign thing, sign up. It's literally a pre-generated email that we send out, and all you have to do is you alter it the way you want to, and then you take it to your legislator. You hit send, and it gets emailed to them. And you know, it's just keep us in the loop. Whatever is happening with PBMs or anything, keep us in the loop, because if we don't know, we don't know, right? And so it's really hard. We know PBMs are an issue, but the detail that you guys are going through, we don't know that. So looping us in and having, if you invite a legislator, have us there so that we can be like, hey, we would like to, you know, to talk to you up in Lansing regarding this issue and how we can help, you know, independent pharmacists so and so.
Because you have the technical knowledge to be able
You know,
to.
and it's not just an independent issue. I think it's overall it's going to be a pharmacy issue. PBM is not just an independent issue, I think, and it's not just an MPA issue. It's an overall patient healthcare and accessibility issue. I know a lot of our independents. I mean, my father goes to an independent pharmacy, and sometimes the pharmacist just goes above and beyond because he cares about my dad as a person. And those relationships that you build, that's what's important, and we cannot keep losing, like you said, one a day nationwide, losing an independent pharmacy, and that's just unacceptable.
Yeah, especially in the state of Michigan, we have 880 now independent pharmacies. But you're talking about a state with almost, 9 million people?
When I
10
first
million
started-
people- 10 million people are going
When I
to
first
just
started-
900 pharmacies.
Yeah. When I first started at the MPA, it was about 1,200
Yes.
independents.
Yeah.
And that was in 2016.
And they're closing at an unprecedented rate right now. Independent pharmacies are the fastest closing business, yes.
Okay.
Of all businesses,
In the state of
of
Michigan or across
all,
the country?
of all across the country, of all businesses, of all of the subsects, the number one is independent pharmacy closing the fastest. And that should tell you a lot.
Well, that does. Thank you for that. And my son brought up this question is for the both of you. And I think we touched on this a little bit earlier too. Where do you see the Michigan independent pharmacies landscape? A look ahead in 5 years, 10 years. How do you see things changing, evolving, getting better, getting worse?
I think in the next 5 years, if we really get things together and we approach the state to kind of put the PBMs back in their place and regulate them, and I mean heavily okay, how about this? Regulate the PBMs as heavily as you regulate the independent pharmacies, and we'll be quiet.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody will win. It would be a lucrative business and everybody will do just fine, and the landscape would level itself out. Everybody is able to participate within the networks.
Yes. And that way the expectations are the same across the board.
Absolutely, and then it would only be fair, because then the law is not bending one way over the other. We don't want preference over,
Yeah.
we don't, in what you're doing is you're saying that you'd have to make a certain amount of money and have attain a certain status for us to even give you any consideration within the state. That doesn't make any sense. As the constituents, you're allowing out-of-state, companies to come in here and play with our rules and regulations and our laws, break our back, and then they go back to their state and they're living tax-free, they're, paying a minimal amount. I mean, just so that I could say it, just to get it off my chest, removing the jurisprudence exam so you can hire pharmacists out of state or out of country for lesser money is dirty. It is. You're taking opportunities away from Michigan residents that need it. And then you're like, oh, why aren't pharmacists working? Because you're hiring somebody at $16 an hour to say something on the phone, whereas you can get a live human being to talk to you. So it's a horrible position that pharmacies are in right now. If it doesn't get taken care of right now on the legislative level, I don't think it's gonna even out, no.
Oh, wow. Probably be a lot more loss and a lot more shutting down of these independent pharmacies.
Yeah, and then, but who's gonna absorb all of these
Right.
pharmacists?
Yeah.
Where are they gonna go? I mean, we already know that Rite Aid is shutting down their stores. CVS is already in trouble for their opioids. Walgreens is in trouble for opioids.
I know there's one that shut down in Detroit already, that shut down in Detroit yesterday. And there's two more, one in Novi and one in Sterling Heights that are shutting down on May 23rd.
I think they have 3 years to close out 80% of their stores, if I'm not mistaken.
80%.
And then within the area that they were marked in. And then
Okay.
CVS also is under the same kind of pressure. I don't know what their percentages are, but they have to close stores as well.
Okay. Do you have anything?
Well, we didn't talk about the problems as far as accessibility, because these PBMs are reducing the reimbursements so low. Kroger's, as an example, stopped taking express scripts, okay? So that's 2,800 pharmacies that won't take express scripts becoming, and all, so that loses a lot of access. I don't know where the final situation is, the approval, but Kroger's wanted to buy Albertsons. And if they bought Albertsons, that would take it to 4,600 pharmacies that won't take express scripts.
Oh.
And some of your PSAOs, which is Pharmacy Services Administrative Organizations, are rejecting express script because it's so low. You just can't reimburse, dispense drugs at a negative value.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that we see too, that patient access is gonna go down because of the such low reimbursements.
Especially with
Which is
the
always
aging
bad.
population. We have an aging population right now. The baby boomers are at an all-time high for their medications and their health ailments. Who's going to, and they're not technologically savvy, let's be honest. They're not gonna, get on a smartphone and then, QR code their, they're not gonna do it. I mean, My mom refuses to learn how to learn on the new remote control for the new TV. So it's hard to say, hop on, scan your code and all the, it's hard. So who's going to give them the personalized attention that they need? And you have things like dementia and Alzheimer's and things of that nature. And all these caregivers, it becomes sloppy.
Yeah.
Very sloppy, very messy, and there's no coordination. So where do we draw the line is really the question. I mean, it's not about 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What about today?
Yeah.
How about today? What are we seeing right now in the land? It's failing. Independent pharmacies failing. And how do we fix it?
Oh, wow. I think this has been a very informative discussion. I know I learned a lot. I believe everybody else did as well. Are there any last remarks you'd like to make before we open it up to Q&A with the audience?
Again, I think it's a collective issue, right? It's not just a one person issue. This is a very great start to the discussion. And I think it's us as pharmacists, we are our own voice, and we need to stop just, voicing our concerns, and we need to act as well.
Yes.
So I am really excited to the next steps, having advocates like Mason State and Wayne right here is a great first step as well. So I appreciate you guys being here to voice all that concerns as well.
Appreciate you too. Yes, thank you all, honestly. This has been very, very informative. And at this time, I'd like to open it up for discussion from the audience. Does anyone have any questions?
I'll start. Wayne, you had mentioned that you gave a presentation regarding these issues and concerns to our governor as well as the attorney general. I was curious just to have the audience just listen to what are the sentiments that were shared during that presentation. Did you receive any feedback or input as to what the action items will be moving forward?
Not definitive types of answers yet. It's always, when you look at things like this, especially when we're talking about some of the antitrust stuff, the governor did mention, said, how do pharmacies make money today? And I said, you can't do it through dispensing at all. They've got to do something different. She did offer up the fact that I do any executive laws, executive types of things. And I said, yes.
Order?
Executive orders, yes, and so that was one of the things that, is still out there and open to, in discussion. The Attorney General looked at a few things and said she's working on a consumer protection law, and then she may be able to include small businesses in that, but this latest antitrust, that was 3 weeks ago, and their staff did call us back and say, yes, we're looking at this from multiple directions. I was over in Washington, D.C. last week and met with Rashida, and she was really interested in the antitrust stuff and talked about getting together and seeing if she could write a letter to the Federal Trade Commission on this. She wanted potentially support. Debbie Dingle's my rep, and I think I can potentially get her. John James, who military equivalent, Marine Corps, and also.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk to see if he will work with Rashida. I should, but we can work on that. But she wants a couple of voices to go to the Federal Trade Commission.
You can encourage them to walk across the
Sure.
aisle. I think this is more of a bipartisan
It
issue.
It has to be.
Yeah,
It has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't know which pharmacist is a Republican or a Democrat.
But those are just two different personalities,
Yes. Very true, very true.
Everyone except the Green Party.
Any other questions from the audience?
I have two questions. It sounds like previous to this newest legislation, the regulatory commission was not DIFS. Who was overseeing it beforehand and what? No one?
It's a good joke. Nobody.
Nobody
Yeah,
at all.
They were operating.
No, and they were
Just
only put in
free
place because there was nobody else.
And to be honest, what happened is that the PBMs have governed everything based upon what they said is ERISA, okay? You can't attack the federal laws and regulations. That's why everything's changed within the last 2 years when the Supreme Court did the ruling on Rutledge, versus the PCM, which is the lobby for the PBMs. They ruled 8-0, okay, that the PBM, that state can now govern the PBMs in their own programs and all. And that's the type of thing that's still open for discussions on a lot of areas, okay? One of the things I asked the Attorney General, I said, okay, the fact that the PBMs get exemptions from this anti-kickback law for Medicare and Medicaid, why is that allowed to be carried down to the state level, state programs? Because the kickbacks are there, we call them, it's lost the terminology, scripts, what script is, formulary. Okay. Well, blank there. Formulary is the same type of thing, okay? When you get a script comes in and it's not in the formulary for the PBM, you gotta go back to the doctor, get a new script, and the reason it's not formulary, because they're not getting a kickback on that, okay? So, yeah, it's a crazy industry right now, and it really needs to be sorted out.
And then the second question that I had is regarding, you know, you were talking about antitrust and some sort of other legal principles. Is there the potential for some sort of class action or a lawsuit? Is there something looming? And what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely room for that. Right now, we just have to get all the information in order and present it to the proper people. If at some point it can be addressed through legislation and things of that nature, I feel like it'll move smoothly in the proper direction. If not, then it has to be, we have to do it by force. And that's where those class action lawsuits will come in. Hopefully that's something that we can navigate fairly soon. I mean, this is the guy.
We've been working on it, we have a firm out of Chicago that's certainly interested in doing it. The problems that you have with it is most of the contracts that the pharmacy sign through the PSAOs are forbidding class action, and they wanna go to arbitration.
Yes.
The forced arbitration.
So the strategy that we're discussing right now is to take a couple of pharmacies that have gone out of business, okay, because you're worried about retaliation, okay? If you see this pharmacy's part of a class action lawsuit, am I gonna cut them off?
Yeah.
The pharmacy that I use, 70% of the business is Blue Cross Blue Shield, okay? If Blue Cross Blue Shield cuts the contract, they're out of business, okay? So we have to be careful of the retaliation, so that's the basic type of thing, is to try to do it with one or two.
It's a smart workaround to go
Mhm.
after pharmacies that have shut down.
Yeah,
To
because
have them
the
be
retail,
ones
yeah,
that-
exactly.
So they don't have to worry about the retaliation,
Yeah.
and they're not under contract.
This is what we're dealing with though, you see
Yeah.
that in their contract, it
Yeah.
says that you cannot, and it's crazy.
So what we hope is, the strategy we're using is the fact that, okay, we settled this one or two pharmacies here.
Yeah.
Now I have 1,500 here. Would you like us to bring all 1,500 of them as
Yeah.
individuals, or would you prefer to have it discussed as a group? So that's kind of what we're looking at. But the big thing is to get these law firms to do it on a no contingent basis and all that type of stuff. So it's a process, you know?
And not just one, do you wanna go after all PBMs? Do you wanna make an example out of one? Do you wanna use certain aspects of these cases and hide some aspects? It's an early game,
Of course.
we don't know yet, so the opportunity is ours. Yeah, so we'll see what happens with that.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
So one question, one of the statistics that I recently read, that there's been a reduction of 60% in pharmacy applications, to pharmacy school. So to me, that's very alarming and concerning, and it should be to legislatures as well. What do you think some of the things that you talked about today that you covered is probably causing, the shift in the reduction in applications and people considering, independent pharmacy or pharmacy in general, becoming a pharmacist as a career pathway. What do you attribute that to, and what do you think legislatures can do to kind of mitigate that shift and that dynamic that we're witnessing?
Well, with regards to people not applying to pharmacy school, a lot of the other avenues that pharmacists could go into haven't really been discussed prior to pharmacy. What they see is pharmacists that work in retail chains or independent pharmacies or in the hospital.
Yeah.
A lot of times they don't know about education, they don't know about research and development, they don't know about any of these other tactics or even community outreach. they don't know about these things. And so it makes it quite difficult to convince them otherwise that, hey, there's other avenues, because they just see people closing their doors, being fired at, in large amounts. And right now with these larger chains in the news and the things that we hear, like the opioid lawsuits, the misfill lawsuits, the firing at random, it's also discouraging. It's almost like being an engineer and saying nothing electrical is going to happen for the next 10 years. You're not going to complete your degree, or no laws are, or we're not going to be able to litigate or take the trial, whatever the case may be. Why would you want to? Or even in medicine, no one's ever going to get sick for the next 5 years.